y'all. You see, and then after I run out of y'all to give to, I got to call God and say, God, just stop giving me all these blessings right here, because I ain't got nothing to do with them. I'd sure like to know what that's like. But he said in his word that he would open the windows of heaven, pour us out a blessing where we won't have room enough to receive it. Oh, man, that's got to be something right there. And I believe God will do it because he said he'd do it. Now, are we doing what we need to do to get that window open? That's the key right there. Are we doing what we need to do to get that window open? Because he said he'd do it, y'all. He said he'd do it now. And so tonight I want to talk about being blessed beyond measure. And we're going to focus our lesson on the book of Ezra, chapter 7, primarily verses 11 through 20. Now, we'll dabble in some of the other parts of the book, but we're going to primarily focus on verses 11 through 20. And our aim is this. Our lesson will come from the book of Ezra, chapter 7, verses 11 through 20. Our aim is to show that God has, can, and will bless us through people we don't care for and people who we think don't care for us. You see, y'all, we done got caught up in this thing where we think we kind of know where we think all our blessings are going to come from. But God has, God can, and God will bless you through people that you don't think he'd bless you through. See, that's where we got to get. We don't know where our blessings are going to come from or who they're going to come from. Because God can cause anybody to be a blessing to us. And that's what we're talking about right here. You see, in this book of Ezra, we're going to see God doing just that. Blessing Ezra through somebody that they never thought they'd be blessed from. Somebody they didn't think much of, and somebody that they didn't think thought much of them. You see? That's how God blesses y'all. Being blessed beyond measure. Now, let's talk about Ezra for a minute before we get to the verses. Ezra was a priest during the time of the Jewish return from the Babylonian captivity. Now, y'all, before it even gets started in your head that God blessed Ezra because he was a priest, no, he didn't. God blessed Ezra because of something he did, and we'll see that at the end of the chapter, or the end of the lesson. You see, because God wants to bless all of us because we're all a priest. You remember what 1 Peter 2 and 9 said? You're a royal priesthood. You're a holy nation. You see, a peculiar people, he said. That means a people of God's very own. And he said, we should show forth his praises unto him that sent us. God wants to bless all of us. And it has nothing to do with Ezra being a priest is the reason he's getting blessed. Nothing to do with him. Because you know the only difference between a priest and the rest of the people back in those days, the priest could talk to God. That's it. He had the same problems everybody else had. And the first thing he had to do when he go before God was to confess his sins. God, forgive me. And then forgive John. Forgive Pat. Forgive Al. But you forgive me first. Because I ain't no better than they are. I'm just as messed up as they are. So when you see this word priesthood, don't let that throw you off right there. Yes, Ezra was a priest, but he wasn't no better than anybody else because he had his problems just like everybody else. He, in those days, just had access to God. He could talk to God, and he was the only one that could talk to God. But now, all of us are priests. Why? Because all of us can talk to God. And so we see Ezra was a priest during the time of the Jewish return from the Babylonian captivity. Now, he was part of that second wave that returned from Babylon. Now, when they say wave, this is a military term, okay? In other words, it'll be a group of soldiers they send in to attack one at the first time. And then after they come and do theirs, another group will come behind them, which would be the second wave. And then after that, another group would come behind them, which would be the third wave. You see, that's the way Babylon attacked Jerusalem and Israel when they attacked them. That's the way they did it. They did it in 3 waves or 3 phases, if that's a better term. 3 phases. You see, the first phase, what they did was they came in and they got all the leadership, get all the prominent folks, the folks that's running things, the folks that's making the decisions. You see, they knew if I can get these people here that's running this city here in this town and get them out of the way, the rest of the people are going to have a hard time because they don't know how to run a utility company. They don't know how to run a gas company. They don't know how to manage a bank. Get the people that's running things, and you're going to cripple that town or cripple that city. That's what they did right here, you see. And that, you see, it says right here, he was part of that second wave that returned to Jerusalem. God allowed the children of Israel to return back home the same way he allowed them to be taken, in waves. They were taken captive in waves. God let them come back in waves. You see, that first wave was under Zerubbabel and them to come back and rebuild the temple. That was Zerubbabel and Yeshua. They came and rebuilt the temple. But look at what we got right here. He allowed them to be taken captive. Babylon attacked Israel in 3 waves. The first wave that came in tore down the walls and took the leading officials captive. The prophet Daniel was one of those who was taken during this first wave. And then in this second wave, or this second attack, they took the rest of the citizens of Jerusalem captive. And in the third wave, they came and destroyed the temple and burned the entire area down. And you can read about all this here in 2 Kings, starting at the 18th chapter. You can read about how they attacked them. Or in the book of Chronicles, it'll tell you about all of this stuff right here, you see. But God allowed Israel to return in 3 waves. The same way he allowed them to be taken, okay? And as I just mentioned, in the first return, or the first wave of Israelites who returned, was under Zerubbabel and Yeshua. His name is Yeshua. That's how you pronounce that, Yeshua. I mean, God saved. That's how you pronounce this now right here. And see, their mission was to rebuild the temple. You see, the first thing that needed to be built back in Jerusalem was the temple of God, because it was the house of God. And God needed somewhere to be. So he allowed Zerubbabel and them to come back and build the temple. And in that second wave, Ezra, you see, the second wave was under Ezra, and his mission was to restore worship in the temple. That was Ezra's mission. You see, Zerubbabel and them had already built the temple, but the worship had to be restored. Somebody had to come in there and start the services. Get the worship back in order. Do y'all know we can fall out of worship if you ain't got somebody coming in here running the worship? Worship is just fall off. It just die down, John, if you ain't got somebody preaching on Sunday. If you ain't got somebody teaching Sunday school on Sunday, Sunday school will fall apart. You won't have no Sunday school. Let them show up here 2 Sundays in a row, and they ain't got no teaching. 2 Sundays in a row is all they need. I came to Sunday school, but they didn't have nobody to teach. They ain't coming back that third time. They ain't coming back that third time. Sunday school gone for that person who came out that 2 times and there was no teacher. See? You got to have it. So Zerubbabel said that worship has got to be restored in this temple. And then the third wave was Nehemiah. Y'all familiar with Nehemiah? He was the one who came in under that third wave or third group of Israelites to restore the walls. Because they tore down the walls, you see. There was a temple, worship, and the walls had to be put back. Now, when we look at Ezra, we see a man who was blessed beyond measure. God calls King Artaxerxes. King Artaxerxes, y'all. Notice what this guy was. He was a Persian king. He was a Gentile king. And he was a heathen king. In other words, when I say he was a Persian king, that means he wasn't a Jew. And Jews didn't fool with anybody that wasn't a Jew. They didn't even fool with the half-brothers. They didn't even fool with no half-brothers. If you wasn't a Jew didn't want to fool with you. But notice that goes on and said, and they were Gentile, which means that they were not a part of the covenant of God. They couldn't have God. The Jew didn't want them to have God. Wouldn't tell them about God. That was the problem that Peter had, the reason they had to take him up on the rooftop. That's the problem he had. You see? And then a heathen means that you destined for hell. You're destined for hell. You're a heathen. You ain't got no God. There ain't no way you're going to make it. You're a heathen, you see? But that's what this Artaxerxes, King Artaxerxes, was to the Jews. That's what he was. He mounted to nothing to them, but he was the king. He was the king, and they were under Persian rule after the Persians came back and defeated the Babylonians. They were under the Persian rule, okay? So that's what we're saying right here. It says a Persian king, and notice what he did. It says this Persian king showed some concern for how the worship was going in Jerusalem. See, what Ezra had to do was he had to get permission from this king to go and check it out and see what was going on in Jerusalem as far as the worship. Now, when we get to verses 11 through 14, it's going to show us the concern for the ministry. The concern for the ministry. You see, it appears that Ezra had sent a letter to, or had asked for permission from the king to go check on the temple. He wanted to go see what was going on in the temple, y'all. He knew Zerubbabel and them had completed the temple, but Ezra wanted to go and make sure the worship was going on in the temple like it's supposed to be. But he had to get permission from the king to do it. And so it appears that a letter was sent, or that Ezra requested a permission, and a letter was sent from the king. You see? And it appears that the request from the king permission to go to Jerusalem to see how the worship was being conducted in the temple that Zerubbabel and Joshua had returned, or Joshua had finished building. And God placed on the king's heart to allow it to happen. Let's look at verses 7. Notice what verse 7 says. And this is reading from I think this is the NET version. I think that's what I got on here, is the NET version of the Bible. But just go along with me here. In verse 7 of the book of, in verse 7 of chapter 7 of the book of Ezra, listen to what it says right here, reading from the NET version of the Bible. It says, in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes, Ezra brought up to Jerusalem some of the Israelites and some of the priests, the Levites, the attendants, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants. You see, it appears that Ezra had requested permission to go, and the king had granted him his permission, because we see him going right here, don't we? But notice, if you go down to verse 11, notice what happens here in verse 11. What follows is a copy of the letter that King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra, the priestly scribe. It says, Ezra was a scribe in matters pertaining to the commandments of the Lord and his statutes. Now, let me stop right there for a minute. And let's talk about these verses here before we go any further. It says a letter was sent to Ezra from the king saying, okay, you got permission to go do what you want to do. You got permission to do this here. But then it tells us that Ezra was a scribe. That word scribe right there means that he's learned in the laws of God. He's a student of the laws of God. He knows the laws of God well, and he can teach the laws of God. He knows them. He's a scribe. He can write you the laws and teach you all there is about the law. And then it says pertaining to commandments and to statutes. Y'all know the difference between a commandment and a statute? A commandment is something that you got to do. A statute is something that you don't have to do all the time. But they both come from God, and they must be done. Let me give you an example. In the Ten Commandments, God says, honor your mother and your father. That's a command to do. That's a command. Man, you always honor your mother and your father. That's a command. And all of the Ten Commandments are commands, okay? A statute is what you'll find in the book of Leviticus, where he told them every 50 years, you put aside some grain over there for the poor folks. Every 50 years. It ain't something you got to do all the time. You do it every now and then. Every 50 years was the only time they had to leave the poor folks some food over there. They couldn't harvest all of the crop. They called it the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee. You didn't have to do it every day. Whereas a commandment got to be done every day. Whereas a statute is something you do every now and then, or prescribed. That's what they call it. It's a prescribed command. You do it when the time comes to do it. But that's the difference, see? You didn't do the Jubilee every day. You didn't do it every year. You only did it every 50 years. But yet, honor your mother and father. Don't have no other God before me. Something you do every day. That's a command, y'all. Ezra understood all the commands and all the precepts of God. He knew what they were, and he knew how they worked. You see, it says he was a scribe in matters pertaining to the commandments of the Lord and his statutes over Israel. And then in verse 12 it says, and Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, scribe of the law of the God of heaven, I have now issued a decree that anyone in my kingdom, from the people of Israel, even the priests and the Levites, who wishes to do so, may go up with you to Jerusalem. You see, the king has granted Ezra his permission. In other words, Ezra had been blessed by somebody who he probably thought he wouldn't be blessed. A Persian king, a Gentile king, a heathen king as a Jew would look at him. You see, he's being blessed by somebody, and he's showing concern for the worship. He's showing some concern, y'all, for the worship here. The king didn't have to be concerned about the worship in Jerusalem. He didn't have to be concerned about that, but he's concerned. Let me show you how much he was concerned. Verse 15 going to show how he contributed to Ezra's ministry. Verse 15, he contributed to Ezra's ministry. Notice what it says on the outline here. The king was not only concerned about the worship services, but he also understood that ministry costs. Don't y'all know ministry costs? It costs to have these lights on in here, y'all. It does now. It got to be paid. Somebody got to pay for this. That's just all there is to it. Somebody got to pay for us to be able to come out here, have Bible study with lights on. With lights on. Now, you can do it in the dark and probably save you a few dollars. But ministry costs, y'all. It does. It costs. But notice what the king did, y'all. When we go to verse 15, it's going to show us the contribution to the ministry. Notice what it says. It says, he and all 7 of his counselors made a free will offering to Ezra's ministry. I mean, that's sort of like Ezra didn't ask them to give him anything. Ezra didn't go to the king and say, King, I need to go and check on the worship there in Jerusalem right there, you know, and Is it possible that y'all can you can raise an offering between you and your serving counselors to kind of help us out? The Bible don't say Ezra did that nowhere. It said the king did it freely. Did it freely, y'all. Notice, let's go to the verses and look. Let's look at verse 15. Look at what it says right here. You see, after he told them that you are authorized by the king and his 7 advisors to inquire concerning Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your possession. Then in verse 15 he said, and to bring silver and gold, which the king and his advisors have freely contributed to the God of Israel who resides in Jerusalem. He said, we're going to give you something to go with. The king understood ministry cost. And I'm not going to let you go down there broke, Ezra. I understand if you're going down there to reestablish a ministry, you need to have something to go down there with. And so the king and his 7 advisors freely gave them something to take with them. They contributed to the ministry, y'all. They contributed to it. You see, but notice something else that happens right here. He going to tell them, to look, we giving to the ministry, but you ought to be able to go and canvass the streets and find some of your other people, your other Jewish people. Remember, it was all Jews here in captivity, right? So you ought to be able to go canvass the streets and find somebody out there that cares too and want to contribute. You ought to be able to go find somebody. Just go out there and ask your fellow brethren that you go into the ministry, see if they want to contribute to it. See if they want to contribute to it. Look at what I put on the handout here. It says, verse 16 shows that there are others that should be concerned or that should care about the worship services back home. Now, if you can get this Persian king to care about it, and he's not even a Jew. He cared enough about the worship services in Jerusalem to go in his pocket and get some, and then command his 7 advisors to give something. You ought to be able to go out there and find some of your fellow Jewish brethren to give something to. Got to be able to do it. That's what the king tells him. Look at verse 16 and see, ain't that what he told him? Look at verse 16. Again, reading from the NET version. He said, we're going to contribute to God who resides in Israel, along with all the silver and gold you may collect throughout all the provinces of Babylon and the contributions of the people and the priests of the temple of their God, which is in Jerusalem. In other words, you ought to be able to go out there and find somebody that's willing to give to the ministry. You ought to be able to go out there. If me, being a Persian, not a Jew, being a Gentile, was kind enough to give something towards your ministry, surely your brethren will give you something. Surely your brethren will give you something. You see, and Ezra needed to go check on this temple and make sure that what was going on in that temple was what's supposed to be going on in the temple. Y'all understand what I'm saying? Because just because you say this is a church don't mean that what's going on in this church is church business. You take this edifice right here, beautiful as it is. This church here could be an event center just as quick as it was a church. Gucci Mane and them could come in and just turn this place out. They can. Usher them. Come up in here. Good. Yeah, it can be good right up in here. You see, it's not the fact that this building is a church. What makes this place special, y'all, is what goes on inside it. The same thing that makes you special. What goes on inside you. Not what's outside of you, what goes on inside of you. You see, Zerubbabel and them had built a temple, but what was going on inside that temple? What was going on inside the temple? You see, a church can easily be turned into a nightclub, and a nightclub can easily be turned into a church. I know what I'm talking about. You got one right up the street there. Don't tell me I'm wrong. It has nothing to do with the building itself, what goes on inside the building. So Ezra had to go and see what was going on inside that building. And the king said, I'm not sending you there. Broke. Because ministry costs. So I want to make sure you go in there with something to make sure that what's going on in that building is going on, is what's supposed to be going on in that building. That's why he sent him with all that gold and silver from him and his 7 advisors. And then he told him, you go canvass the streets. Ask your brethren. Let them know you're finna go back and establish the worship. And let them contribute to it too. See? He told him, along with all the silver and gold that you may collect throughout all the provinces of Babylon, and the contributions of the people and the priests for the temple of their God, which is in Jerusalem. He said, you go out there and see how many of them, because it ought to be somebody out there. It ought to be some of your Jewish brethren out there that cares about the ministry too. That's what he's telling them. That's what this king here is telling him. God has pressed upon this king hard to help Ezra. It's pressed upon his heart here, you see. Ought to be others. Now, notice in verse 16 what it shows right here on the outline. You see, verse 16 shows that there are others that should care about the worship services back at home. And it ought to be somebody else that cares. If you're a Jew and they're building a temple for a Jew, you ought to be willing to do something to help. You see, not all the Israelites returned back to Jerusalem. Some of them chose to stay right there in Babylon. I mean, keep in mind, y'all, they were there for 70 years. 70 years. Their captivity was 70 years. So they had built homes and vineyards and planted big gardens and everything. And a lot of them just decided, no, I want to stay right here. Life is just good right here. So all of them didn't go back, you see. Some chose to stay in Babylon. The king told Ezra to canvass the streets, and he should find some out there who care about the worship service back home and is willing to make a free will offering. Don't go begging. No, don't go out there begging for nothing. He don't want you begging. Don't beg for nothing. See if they'll make a free will offering. You see, the way you find out if a person really cares about your situation is if they give you something without you asking them. They in a bad situation now. Need some money. It's sort of like a guy come up to you and say, man, you know, my transmission just went out on my car, man. And they say it's going to cost me $2,300 and I just don't have it. And he left you just like that. Didn't ask you nothing. Didn't ask you for no help or nothing. And you turns around and come back and say, hey, man, look, here's $500 to help you out. He didn't ask you for no $500. You did it out of the kindness of your heart. That shows you really cared about his situation. You see, the way you find out if a person really cares about your situation is what they do for you out of the kindness of their heart. And you ain't got to beg them for it. You ain't got to ask for it. And that's how God wants to bless us, with people who will do things for us out of the kindness of their heart. We're talking about being blessed beyond measure, y'all. This guy, Ezra here, is being blessed beyond measure because he's getting a lot of things and not even asking for it. God just showering blessings upon him. Just putting blessings on him, y'all. He just put it on. You see, but notice I put on the handout here. It says, you see, with a free will offering, you find out who really cares about the worship service. You find out who really cares about the worship services when they give a free will offering. I didn't have to go back here and beg nobody. Didn't have to sell nothing to get it. No dinners. You see, didn't have to put on no special show to raise no money, no talent shows. They did it out of the kindness of their heart. And see, that shows that they really care if they would do that, you see. And so that's what the king instructed Ezra to do. He said, you go and walk down the provinces, all the provinces of Persia, and every Jew you find, tell him you're going back and establish the worship. They ought to be willing to give you something to help. Every one of them ought to be willing to give you something to help you in your ministry. Okay? And then in verse 17 to 20, listen at this one, y'all. Verses 17 through 20 shows that we have to be careful with God's blessing. Y'all, we got to be careful with God's blessing, y'all. That's just all there is to it. God can bless us beyond measure. But if we're not careful with God's blessing, those blessings can turn into a curse. Those blessings that God just blessed you with can turn into a curse for you. You can go out there and start spending that money or however, and whatever you spend it on, fall apart. We got to be careful with what we do with God's blessing. You see, when God blesses us, he requires some things of us. He do. When he blesses you, he requires some things of us. And we have to make sure we fulfill the requirements of God with the blessings that he's blessing you with. Let's look at how he looked at Ezra, and then we'll come back to this right here. In verses 17 through 20. Notice what he did. The king just told him, said, look, you go canvass the streets now. We've given you some gold and some silver. Now, I want you to go around and collect all the gold and silver that everybody want to give you, free will offering. You get all of that. You ought to have quite a bit when you get through. That's what he's telling right here. And then in verse 17, he says, with this money, you should be sure. Listen to this now. You should be sure to purchase bulls, rams, and lambs, along with the appropriate meal offering and libations. You should bring them to the altar of the temple of your God, which is in Jerusalem. Now notice he told him, he said, look, you're getting all this help, all these people are contributing to your ministry, right? You need to make sure you provide the things that the temple needs to worship with. You see, a bull was a part of the worship services there. When they made their offerings, they did it with bulls. You see, with sheep, with lambs, meal offerings, you see, for the poor people. You see, everybody couldn't afford to bring a sheep or a bull. You see, the wealthiest of them could bring a bull. And then the middle class people could probably bring a sheep or a lamb. You see? But then when you got to the poor folks, like me, just a little effer of flour is all I could bring. Little effer of flour, for the meal offering. Y'all see what I'm saying? You got to somebody like me, a little effer of flour was all I could bring. And God would accept that. Because that's where I was at that particular time. You see, God blesses us on different levels. You see, your time of blessing may be this year. My time of serious blessing may be next year. So right now, I got to stay with this effer of flour until God blesses me to the lamb, Pat. Then blesses me to the sheep. And then hopefully blesses me to the bull. You see? You had to have some money to get some bulls now. They were prime. Now, everybody didn't have bulls running around there. Most common folk didn't have no bull past the house. You see, but there was some that did. And he's saying that you make sure, Ezra, that you got all these things you need for the worship service, because that's what they used in the worship services in the temple back in those days. The blood of bulls and the blood of lamb and the blood of goats, you see. All that looked toward to the blood that Christ was going to shed on the cross. All of that. Every blood that was shed, because without the shedding of blood, there was no remission of sin. Blood had to be shed. And so they had all these feast days that they had to bring these offerings to, and they had to shed somebody's blood. Somebody's blood had to be shed. So that's what the king is telling Ezra to do with all that money he just got. Don't mess that money up. You make sure you do what needs to be done for that temple. See? He told him, you bring it to the altar, which is in Jerusalem. And then he tells him, say, look, the thing we got to understand is, when we do everything that God requires to do, with the blessing that he has blessed us with, we can do whatever we want to do with the rest of that blessing, as long as it is in the will of God. As long as it's in the will of God. God don't care what you do with the rest of it, as long as you're doing it in the will of God. The rest of that blessing. Notice, Lord, look right here and see. He says in verse 18, you may do whatever seems appropriate to you and your colleague with the rest of that silver and that gold in keeping with the will of God. He said, after you done bought the bulls, after you done made sure you done got the lamb and the sheep, and after you done made sure there's some meal for offering, and after you done did something for a drink offering, he said, whatever's left, you're going to do what you want to do with it. I'm talking about being blessed beyond measure, y'all. He said, you do whatever you want to do. That's the same thing God is saying when we give a dime out of a dollar. He said, you just give me that dime and that 90 is yours to do whatever you want to do with it, as long as according to the will of God. Now, y'all, let me catch y'all before y'all mind get to running too far. As long as it's in the will of God, you can do whatever you want to do with that money. He ain't said go over there and blow it at the casino now, trying to get more of it. He ain't said throw one of these lavish parties here where you got him in there touching toes and going on. No, he ain't talking about that. He ain't talking about that, John. He's talking about as long as you're doing it according to the will of God. God don't mind you buying yourself a new outfit. God don't mind that. God don't mind you getting you some new shoes, a new suit. He don't mind that. That's according to the will of God. God wants you looking good, y'all. He wants you to have nice stuff. God don't care about you getting a new car. He don't care nothing about that. As long as you don't lose your mind when you get the new car. See, new cars make some of us lose our minds, though. As long as you don't lose or go crazy when you get your new car. Don't want to fool with nobody no more. Can't touch your car. Can't lean on it. Get off my car. You see me leaning up against the car talking to Pastor? Come running out there telling me, get off my car. Wait a minute. No, that is not what God is talking about. God don't care about you having a new car, though. Hell, God don't mind you buying a pet, a new outfit. He don't mind that. You can do whatever you want to do with the rest of that money as long as you have done what God requires. You can do whatever you want to do with the rest of it. That's what the king just told him right here. Didn't we just read that right here, y'all? Look at verse 18. He says, you may do whatever seems appropriate to you. That means whatever I see need to be done, I can do it with the rest of this money here. As long as I done took care of God, I can do what I need to do. He said, you and your colleague, you and your brethren, whatever y'all see need to be done, do it after y'all have taken care of God. That's what he says right here. He says, with the rest of the silver and gold in keeping with the will of God. In other words, everything you do ought to line up with God. It ought not to be something you're doing with the rest of that money that's not pleasing to God. Ain't that something, y'all? Here's a man here that's being blessed beyond measure. He done got all this money, and if you go through here and you see, and if you go on down through it, you're going to see this man had a lot of stuff. He got blessed with a lot of stuff for this temple here, y'all. He got blessed with a lot of stuff. Notice, go back to your outline. Notice what I put on the handout. Be careful with God's blessing. Verse 17, we have to make sure we do what God requires us to do with his blessings. Because you can make a blessing turn into a curse. You can. You can make a blessing turn into a curse. I just got through talking about buying you a new car. Well, if you get the wrong attitude with that new car, God will make that car break down. You need a transmission this year. You need a motor next year. The next summer, your air conditioning go out. That car ain't nothing but a curse to you because now you got to spend money after money after money on this car here. But God can also make that car run for 15 years with you having to do nothing but change the oil and brakes on it. I know what I'm talking about. I keep my cars a long time. Linda keeps hers a long time. God can fix those cars where you don't have to do nothing to them but change the oil and brakes on it and put you some new tires on it every now and then. God can do it. But God can also make that car be a nightmare. Everything happening to it. One after another. So that's what we're talking about right here, y'all, in this lesson here. Now, these 5 offerings that we just got through talking about, these 5 offerings, what they represent was the burnt offering. One of them represented the trespass offering, the sin offering, the meal offering, and the drink offering. Those were the 5 offerings that Israel were required to do in the temple. Every year. Every year. You see, the months of March, April, you see, the Jewish calendar ran a little different from ours now, okay? They end of a month will start in the middle of the month. The 14th of the month will be the end of one month, and the 15th of the month will be the beginning of the next month. So from the 15th of one month to the 14th of the next month, in the month of March, would be the spring festivals will start. The spring festivals. You know, that's the Passover, the unleavened bread, the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost. All that would be done in those months right there. And then when the fall festivals came, which came in the month of Tishrei, now that was Nisan. Nisan was March, April, okay? But when you get September, October, that's when you ran into the Feast of the Tabernacles, the Feast of Gathering, the Day of Atonement. Y'all ever notice when the Day of Atonement always is? It's always in the wintertime. Follow your calendars and see. When the Day of Atonement is, it's always in the month October, November. Because the Jewish calendar starts on the 15th of one month and end on the 14th of the next. The Day of Atonement. And during these festivals and these feasts, they had to sacrifice these animals here. For different reasons. For burnt offering, guilt offering, sin offering, trespass offerings, drink offering. You see, the drink offering is what Paul was talking about when he said he was ready to be offered up like a drink offering. They had to do that, y'all. So that's why he required Ezra to make sure he had all of these things in the tabernacle or around the tabernacle somewhere so that they could be provided for. That's what to do. And then in verse 18, when we do all that God asks, he says that whatever is left, we can do whatever we want with it as long as it's in the will of God. Notice what verse 18 says, y'all. Back in Ezra chapter 7. He says, you may do whatever seems appropriate to you and your colleague with the rest of the silver and gold in keeping with the will of your God. Then verse 19 says, deliver to the God of Israel the vessels that are given to you for the service of the temple of your God. When Babylon came and invaded Israel, they took all the vessels that was in the temple. They took the table of showbread, which was representative of Christ, the bread of life. They took it. They took the candelabrum or the lampstand, this golden lampstand that represented Christ as the light of the world. Okay, they took the golden altar that they used to burn the incense on, which was Christ, our intercessory. You see, just before you went into the temple, there was an altar that sat right in front of the veil, and they would burn incense on that. And that incense would symbolize the prayers of the saints going up to God. They took all that stuff. Well, when Persia defeated them, they got it all back. And then he gave it back to Ezra and said, Ezra, you take all this stuff back here and put it right back in the temple. That's what he's talking about right here in verse 19. He says, deliver to the God of Jerusalem the vessels that are given to you for the service of the temple of your God, the rest of the needs for the temple of your God that you may have to supply, you may do so from the royal treasure. Now, in other words, this man done opened his check and done wrote him a blank check and signed it. Here. If you need anything else, here it is. You get it out of my account. You get it out of my account. Y'all see how this man is being blessed beyond measure, y'all? Done wrote him a blank check. He said, whatever else you need out of all that stuff you done got, if you see you need something else, go get it out of my vault right there, my safe, my vault. Go get it. It's yours. I'm talking about being blessed beyond measure. You know, as I stated earlier when we started, I sure would love to know what it's like for God to open the windows of heaven, hold me out a blessing where I won't have room enough to receive. I'd sure like to feel that. Well, he's just showering blessings on me where I just can't receive no more, and I give everybody I know a blessing. And they just keep coming so fast that I run out of give it y'all to give them to, and I have to call up to God and say, God, look, please, don't bless me no more. Don't bless me no more, God. I just can't do nothing with these. You just sending me too many blessings. Wouldn't that be something? But he said in Malachi 3:8-11, he says, will a man rob God? Yet he have robbed me, even this whole nation. He said, y'all need to bring your tithes into the storehouse, that there be meat in my house. He said, then prove me now herewith. I won't open the windows of heaven, pour you out a blessing that you won't have room enough to receive. Then he goes on to say, I will rebuke the vow for your sake. In other words, stuff won't be eating up your money. Your car won't be breaking down every week. You see? Washing machine lasts for 20 years. Nothing had one last for 20 years and didn't want to get rid of it. Said, baby, come on, we need another. No, this one is still running too good, doing too good. Long time. That washing machine lasted. Was it a washing machine or a dryer? It was one of them. It was a washer. Dryer. I'm trying to buy her another dryer. That thing wouldn't tear up, Al. Wouldn't tear up. God can do it, though. God can, he can rebuke the devourer for your sake. And he said, neither shall a vine cast her fruit in the field before its time. God is good, y'all. And God wants to bless us, y'all, beyond measure. He do. We just got to make sure we do what's required to be blessed. Amen? Amen, y'all. We just about out of time. We got about 10 minutes left. You know, I want to open the floor up for questions, for comments, for criticism, and anything y'all want to do. You know, I truly thank God for this lesson right here. Like I said, this is a lesson that I taught in our worship word and y'all. You see, and then after I run out of y'all,